Hello, and welcome to the seventh and last part in a series of videos where I show how I've painted some Titans from Games Workshop's Adeptus Titanicus game in the colour scheme of Legio Mordaxis. In this finale to the series, I cover the last few items such as fixing the armour panels in place and how I painted the guns along with a few other details. Really happy to say my Titans are completely finished. Bases, armour panels, weapons, the whole lot. Apologies on the delay on part 7 coming out. I got distracted by the new 40k Indomitus release. So there's no real excuse, but new toys and all that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do this part in a few short sections where I just go through how I've done the weapons, glued the armour panels on, and a few other bits and bobs just to add a little bit of interest. As you can see, this is the view that most people are going to see your models. I think this is a really good example of where I was talking in one of my earlier videos on how you want to try and put your brighter colours on the top, because you'll notice that the purple Titans stand out a lot more than this one that's got a lot more black on. It's just one of those things to be aware of when you're painting. And with gaming pieces such as these, you don't want to distract from the actual game by having something that's so intricately painted that you have to pick it up and look at it. Anyway, enough of that. I'll get on to some of the breakdown. First thing to talk about is gluing the armour panels on. Now, under normal circumstances, if you were gluing together a miniature that has been painted, what you would probably use is super glue. And the reason for this is plastic glue. What it does is when you apply plastic glue to a layer of plastic, it melts it. You put the next layer on, that melts too, and they mix and then they solidify. So you get a really, really strong bond. Acrylic paint is plastic. Acrylic is a type of plastic, which means that if you accidentally get plastic glue on acrylic paint, it will melt the paint. What that means is it will just pull the paint straight off. You'll end up with a horrendous mess. So as a general rule of thumb, you'd use super glue, even though it's a much more brittle joint and not quite as strong under impact. It tends to hold it together fine. Titans are designed in such a way that they're fantastic in that all the joints are hidden and all those joins. So what you can actually do is you can use plastic glue for that stronger bond, and if the glue does sort of leak out a little bit, it's not a problem because it's not going to cause you a problem. You're not going to lift any paint, you won't see it. So all of the panels were glued on in that way using plastic glue. One exception was this leg panel on this Warhound. I'm not happy with the placement of these diamonds. So at some point in the future, what it might be is I might if I pick up another Warhound, I might pick up one of these armour panels and do it again. I can snap that off. If this was glued on with plastic glue, there's no way I could do that. I'd damage something. Next up, talking staying on the subject of glue, is to glue your Titans onto the base. Now, as you've probably already seen, I pick my Titans up like that. That's how you're going to be playing a game. You're not going to just delicately pick them up by the base every single time. These are gaming pieces after all. What that means is they need to be bound together quite well. I've used resin bases. I'll put a link to the company I purchased these from in the notes. What that means is I need quite a good bond. Plastic glue won't work because this won't melt and bond, etc. So what I've used is a 2-part epoxy. So something like an arrow dye or Gorilla do one as well. What you have to do is you mix it up with the 2 parts, and then you want to apply on the middle of the toes just a good sized blob. However, don't apply so much that when you put it down on the base, it seeps out the side. Because what will happen is that will glue glossy and clear. If you find that you do, and in fact on one of these I managed to put a little bit too much, what you need is a brush on matte varnish. Just go over there, and then you probably want to just go in with some pigments or something like that, just to kind of blend that in, because otherwise it will be very apparent that the glue has bled out. You probably also, if it is a big blob, just get a cocktail stick and just scrape as much as you can, but without spreading it everywhere, because that's one of the things you risk with using epoxy, that it can go everywhere. One thing I will say is I do wish that I'd listened to a few people's advice and I checked the pose of my Reaver legs a little bit better, because some of these were very close. You'll see that they haven't quite lined up as well as I'd like to, and that's because I overposed the leg. It's one of those things, they look fine, but if you're aware of that, if I was doing another set, I would probably do that slightly differently. So, a bit of a quick overview on how I did the weapons next. The weapons were actually really simple, and it basically was done very similar to the chassis with a wash and a couple of dry brushes. If you recall, all the weapons got base coloured with Scale 75 black metal along with everything else right at the beginning. The wash I used was 4 parts Nuln oil, 1 part Drakenhof Nightshade, and 1 part Agrax Earthshade. What the blue does is just subtly changes the hue of the weapon so that it looks different to the chassis. It is very subtle. You might choose not to. You could actually wash it all at the same time as the chassis if you want. Or if you were doing a Loyalist Legion, you wanted to make it a little cleaner, ignore the Agrax and just put 2 lots of Drakenhof Nightshade. And that will just kind of make it a little bit fresher and cleaner. I applied that wash twice to the weapons, and this was to all of them, carapace, the lot. And then it got dry brushed with black metal and heavy metal. And that was just enough. For most of the weapons, that's absolutely fine. Now, I have done a little bit of an extra technique. So if you look, hopefully this comes out okay on the video. This plasma gun basically has a little bit of a blue hue to it. Now, it was still painted in exactly the same way as the rest, but what I did was I thinned down some contrast Aethermatic blue and just applied that over those plasma coils. If you want a more intense effect, just apply it twice, or don't thin it quite as much. It's entirely up to you. But for me, that was just enough to add a little bit of colour interest. I didn't want to introduce a brand new colour, so for mine, I've not gone too bright. The other one is on this beast. And basically, what I've done is in all these little grills, I have used contrast Gryph Hound Orange. It actually works really well, and what you can do is as you apply it, if you get any over, just wipe it down with a finger so that it doesn't stain the edge. But I applied 2 thin coats of this just inside all these vents. I then dry brushed this with a gold. It doesn't make any difference. I think I used Scale 75 Viking gold. But it was just enough to give this a little bit of a brassy finish on its cowling. If you look at the actual 40k scale one, this whole cowling is just quite a thin veneer that goes on the top just to protect and vent. So that really is all there was to it. What you'll notice on a couple of these, there are pipes. These were actually painted with Warplock Bronze, washed with Agrax Earthshade, and then dry brushed with Balthasar Gold. You might not want to do that, or you may choose not to put these pipes on. These pipes really do inhibit where your position in the weapons. This Warhound, I put them on both, as I have with this one. However, on these, if you look, I've not put any pipes on this gun because it just didn't. It just restricted that movement far too much. Next up, really simple bit, and that's the green eye lenses on all of these. All they were was basically you pick the middle of the lens out with heavy metal from Scale 75, and then basically you just want to cover it with some type of clear green paint. I wouldn't use a wash or a contrast paint, don't think they quite do it. I've used Mortarion Green Clear. You could use one of the Citadel gem paints, the green one, or Tamiya Green Clear. They all have the same finish. I would then just go over with a little bit of gloss varnish, and that's just enough to give them this nice, slightly reflective green hint. You're probably best to do that before you glue the face plates on, etc. on these, and hopefully you can just make out that there's that tiny little touch of green in there. So the final bit is basically just adding a little bit more interest to specifically the Reavers, but you also want to do it on the Warhounds as well. And that's from a mechanical engineering perspective. Certain parts of the actual Titan would be lubricated. So a prime example are these big pistons here. They would be they would compress as times go. As the Titan walks, these compressed and retract, etc. So they would naturally need to be completely lubricated. Normally, the way I would achieve that is I'd use some type of glossy clear medium with Seraphim Sepia, and that gives a very realistic sort of 3-in-1 oil effect. Mordaxis, however, leak kind of pollutants. So what I did was I mixed it with Biltan Green, just 50-50 with the Seraphim Sepia. And that gives this quite unhealthy oil. It's still a lubricant, it would still do the job. But it's just enough to kind of not make it feel too fresh and clean. And you just go through and use a small glaze brush and just coat everything. You don't want to varnish it or anything like that. The glossy medium that you use will give you that sheen. And you just pick out any little bits that you think, well, that's probably going to be oily. For example, the Warhand toes and such like. One thing I also use this mix for doing, and I'll just remove that gun, is I actually used it for all the void shield generators. And literally I just worked it round and made sure it pooled in the middle so that you get this darker patch that's a bit grotty in the middle, whereas the bit around the edge is going to be clean. I hope you've enjoyed this series of painting videos. With luck, they'll help you paint your own Titanicus miniatures. I've certainly learnt a lot from this process and worked out some improvements I'll make for future videos. I've already changed the lens on my camera, which has helped to clean up the picture quality quite a bit, and invested in a stereo microphone. I do appreciate any comments and more than happy to answer any questions you may have on the subjects I've covered in my videos. A like and subscribe to the channel is always welcome, and please don't be afraid to find me on Twitter or Instagram.